Matthew Syed. Thanks for being with us tonight. Christina, we're going to go back to the Sunday Times. Slightly different take on coronavirus. The Insight investigation team claiming there were 9 days of dithering in which essentially control of the virus was lost in the UK.
Yes, well, this was when the government was actively pursuing its herd immunity policy, they later denied that they were pursuing a herd immunity policy, but it was very clear. Sir Patrick Vallance used the phrase, and a number of other people did as well. So they were pursuing a herd immunity policy. They thought that this was going to be a kind of flu. They said that most people would get it and we'd all be fine, and they weren't even looking at what was happening in Italy. All around, we could see that in other countries this wasn't just flu. There was a terrible death toll. People were getting seriously ill. They were having damage to their lungs and so on. But still, this was treated like flu. And the government just dithered for 3 weeks. And during that time, the infections went up from 200,000 to 1.5 million, which has resulted now in about 60,000 deaths from coronavirus in this country. The official figures are lower, but the FT have estimated, and so have the ONS, that it's between 60 and 65,000. So between 60 and 65,000 families are now in a state of huge grief, and they couldn't even be at the bedsides of their dying relatives. They couldn't say farewell to them. They couldn't even have proper funerals for them because our Prime Minister wasn't listening to the scientific advice, which 3 weeks before lockdown was telling him that this was really serious, this was going to have horrendous effects, there were going to be vast numbers of deaths, and he didn't act. When he did act, it was too late. So now we have all these deaths, we have more deaths coming up, and we will have millions of people unemployed in this country because our lockdown will have to be much longer to cope with all the deaths and the rate of infection than it would otherwise have been. So I'm afraid there will of course be an inquiry, and the government accepts that. But really, I don't think any of us really cares at this point whether the government gets a good mark, a bad mark, a medium mark, a C++, a B-. What we would like would be to have fewer deaths. We would like to get back the people we have lost, and we would like the people who are going to lose their jobs not to have to lose their jobs. And all of these things are not possible because of the government's delays.
Okay, Matthew.
Well, I think it's definitely the case that, this investigation is an outstanding one because it gets so much detail, so much texture around what was going on in the minds of scientists and ministers in the crucial period after the emergence of COVID-19 in China and the belated lockdown in late March. And my sense, which is corroborated by this story, is, as Christina alluded to, the government and many of its advisors were fixated on pandemic flu. If you look at the planning documents from 2010 onwards, it's about pandemic flu. If you look at the papers being produced in February, they're on the assumption that COVID-19 is like pandemic flu. And yet we knew from Asia, with pandemic flu, you just let it go through the population. But we knew from Asia and elsewhere that coronavirus could be contained. And I think that's the explanation for why containment was not modelled and why we didn't spend much more strenuous efforts ramping up our testing and tracing apparatus in that critical period. And I think that will be the eventual outcome of an inquiry. There was effectively groupthink at the heart of government.
We've got to leave it there. Matthew Syed. Christina